Before we get into today's episode, I've created a short questionnaire that will help me get to know you better. Those that fill out the questionnaire will get entered into a draw to win an Amazon gift card. So there's a link in the description for the episode. Click it, fill out the questionnaire, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. Now for today's episode. This is the Michael Bryan Show. Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. And today I'm joined with Wendy White, who's the CEO of Face It Together, which is an addiction wellness non-profit. Wendy, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for having me. I appreciate it.
So when it comes to addiction, I imagine lots of different complications. It's never a straight line in terms of helping someone recover, hopefully get their life back. What have you found has been the real needle mover with it? Is it having supportive people around you? Is it having the right course of treatment? Like, what have you found in your experience to be the things that make the biggest difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, addiction is messy. It often has a lot of positive outcomes when people are trying to get well, but there's can be a lot of setbacks too, and it's just the course of the illness. But I think our approach is really specialized to each individual person and focuses on the person as a whole versus really focusing on the substance because the substance is often a symptom of something else going in that person's life. And so I think the for our program, having a peer, having someone who's walked those steps, it helps remove some of that shame and stigma that surrounds addiction. I think that's the biggest barrier in a lot of people getting help and being honest about where they are in their journey. And so creating an environment where people can truly talk about where they're at, what they're going through, and if they do have a setback, that they have the support there to help them through it.
It must be very tough to do that. Like the idea of you could try your best, but someone may always have this barrier up, this wall up. You could try and be as empathetic as you can and compassionate, but they still might never really let go, for want of a better expression, or let the help in, I guess you could say, because the amount of people that would put barriers up, they get so detached because they don't think anyone else can fully understand. And to a certain extent, they might be right, as in someone may understand parts of it, a certain percentage of it, but there might not be anybody that can truly 100% understand the full context of the situation that you've been in, which is a tough ask for someone on the outside to ever get to that point before you're then able to accept the advice or the help. Like that tug of war, that push and pull must be quite difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is very accurate. I mean, even though all of our coaches have peer experience, they certainly haven't walked the exact same steps that each individual has walked. And so, nobody knows 100% what someone is going through. Um, but I think in terms of letting people in, I think it starts, there's so much feeling of unworthiness when people are deep in their addiction. They don't feel that they're worthy of the care and respect and love that they deserve. And that's honestly the advice society gives loved ones as well. They're like, let them hit rock bottom, cut them out of your life. They're not doing you any good, or, whatever the story goes. That's not the right path to get people well. And so we're very diligent about creating a space that is very filled with dignity and respect, bright colors, windows. It's not a cinder block basement, because everybody deserves to be treated as a human. And I think that's the first step in getting people well and getting people to recognize that they deserve that care. And also helping loved ones recognize that there's ways to help and connect in a way that is healthy and helpful. And that it doesn't mean that someone has to hit rock bottom before they get help.
I think that's quite a common theme with a lot of people's journey is they all seem to hit rock bottom, don't they? Like for some reason, for whatever reason it is, every comeback story or every like rags to riches, as they say, it always involves getting to rock bottom. And I can't fathom why. in a way. Like, why should someone have to hit rock bottom before they then decide to do something about it? And I speak of someone with health conditions as well, Wendy. So I get it as well. Like, I wish I could afford to be lazy sometimes. I wish I could afford to take my eye off the ball, But it's a slippery slope, as I'm sure you're aware as well, whereby it gets so easy to not do the things that you need to do, or it gets so easy to just keep doing the things that you've always done. And it puts you in this position where it's harder to change than it is to just stay the same. And I wonder if that's the same throughout, to the point where people hit rock bottom. Maybe, I wonder what you think, Wendy, but maybe it's because they don't experience the decline. They don't think they're declining. Surely if you notice maybe you've lost a step, or you keep forgetting where you put your keys, or I don't know, there must be something that makes you connect. Okay, I'm losing a step here,
Mm-hmm.
or something's not quite going the way it normally is, despite, doing the same thing. I'm not getting the same result anymore. What needs to change? I wonder if that's what it is. Well, people just don't notice that they're declining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's certainly could be part of it. I think there is, particularly with alcohol, it's so pervasive across society that it's so normalized that people don't recognize the impact that alcohol is having on their life. And so they like, this is what I do. I go to a work party and I'm going to have 3, 4, 5 drinks, and I'm going to come home and maybe have a couple more. I mean, that's just normal. And so I think it takes a lot more for people to recognize that they have a problem with it. Um, and we really do. I mean, we work with anybody from the homeless to an executive at an organization, is what I always say. But really, our sweet spot of where we want to help people is the people that are still employed, still married, still in their house, all of those. It's not kind of the stereotypical person with addiction. And I think it's that stereotype too that drives it. Like, well, I'm still working, I'm functioning, I'm doing what I need to be doing. I don't need help. I got this. I look great from the outside outside
Yeah.
looking
Hmm.
in. Might be a mess behind closed doors, but you just keep doing the things. And so I think it is helping change that stigma, as I mentioned earlier, and just getting people to recognize that there are ways to get help before you get to that point. And part of our program too, we support harm reduction, which I think is a great concept to talk through when you are in that spot. So, maybe, like I said, you go to the work party and you have 5 drinks. Well, maybe you go to the work party and you have 2 drinks. Okay, great. Like that's progress, right? That's better. It's going to make your life healthier, happier. But it doesn't mean that you have to cut everything out. And so just figuring out that right balance, and again, removing that stigma that I think is so prevalent.
I wonder what your take is on the idea of being functional, because that might play into what we've been talking about. And I mentioned, you might not experience a decline. It could be a cultural thing, but for some reason, we have this idea that if you're functional, then you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that might play into it, whereby if it's normal for all of your friends to go out for a drink, apparently, if you don't do that, that's seen as wrong for some reason. And I mean, I'm not saying that you can't have any drink at all, but I'm saying that sometimes being functional shouldn't necessarily be the barometer for improving yourself in a way. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think it's well, it is tricky because it's usually you want to say like a gradual engagement, right? Like you slowly are drinking more, you may be adding another substance into your life, whatever that looks like. And so it's a gradual change. So yes, that like what's functioning is probably a little bit difficult to define. But if you're having those, however many drinks the night before, you're certainly not working to your full potential the next day. You're, probably didn't sleep well. You're could be hungover, probably maybe not if you're doing this all the time, but you're just still not at your full potential. Um, I think it's really being mindful about when you are drinking or having or smoking marijuana, whatever it might be, being mindful of the why. So if you are doing it from a like, oh, I'm trying to cope with something, okay, maybe this isn't the best way to be going about it. Like if you're trying to mask something else that's going on in your life, then there needs to be probably some other intervention, some other discussion that needs to be happening around that aspect. But I think that is tricky because it's gradual. And again, people think as long as you're still working, you're still, the functioning we don't use the word alcoholic, but the functioning alcoholic that people talk about in society. Um, that's, you know, people don't think that you need help at that point because you're doing all the things, but that's not always the case. Your life isn't as happy and healthy as it could be.
Yeah, I guess it makes it harder as well because you, as the addictee, for want of a better word, can't think of another word. But if you're the person that's addicted to the thing, you don't think you are. You don't think you need the help. And then if you're functional, no one else thinks that you need the help either. It's never going to happen, despite the situation that you're in. And I've been addicted to exercise, and I needed it, and all of those. There are healthy addictions as well, but I think everything has a point and a limit, at a point where you say, you know what, you're not getting the benefits to the consequences here. Like you've got to figure out what your dosage is, and I think that can be an issue whereby you get the benefits in a way by being addicted, depending on what it is. And yet, if you don't think you need the help, you're getting the benefits. Other people see you functioning outside of what you're addicted to. They don't think you need the help either. When do the cracks start showing? Is it behind closed doors, but you've had everyone tell you that you're fine? You've told yourself that you're fine. So when do we actually notice the signs? Do we ever notice them whereby, maybe I am like degrading here and I do need something. It's hard to discern it if everything around you is telling you that you're fine and you don't need the help.
I mean, I think we have a lot of our member stories kind of resonate with that, where they are, like I said, doing all the things. They've got a great job, they have a great family. And we have several people that have shared their story where they were fine for weeks at a time. And then they would go on a bender for 5 days and then have to go to detox. And so, but from the outside, again, they would look like they're fine, but they recognize like, this is not right. This is not, most people are not having to go through this. And so I need to get help with this. I think it's really, and having that self-awareness of what impact is this having on me, on my family, on my work, and am I replacing something else that used to be important in my life with the substance use? So, are you losing connections with your family? Are you, maybe you were religious and going to church and now you're not going to church anymore? Or, just recognizing the signs that you're maybe making a change that isn't what aligned with who you were. And then maybe recognizing that there might need to be something that needs to be done.
That's really interesting prompt actually of like where is whatever it is, could be exercise, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, pick your addiction. But
Right.
where is it replacing something else that used to be important to you? That's quite an interesting prompt because it then becomes more of a priority than the thing that you've replaced it with. Like you use church as an example. I'm not religious myself, but if you were and you're replacing church with the thing, and yet you claim to be religious, that means it's moved up in your priority list and how you would rather spend your time. So that's quite an interesting way of looking at it. Do you have anything else that can help people maybe highlight something that they might need to back off from? Maybe they're not quite fully kind of, your whole life is taken over by this thing. It's time for an intervention, but maybe things are bubbling up behind the scenes. Maybe there's a preference for one thing over something else, and they're not quite sure how to highlight it. Is there anything else like that that you can think of?
Yeah, I guess this would be as things progress, but I know I've heard a lot, like if you're consistently missing work on a Monday, like, oh, that that might be a sign that you're having a little too much fun on a weekend. And just again, it's a change in your pattern of your behavior. If that's not something you have consistently done, being, recognizing that that's not, and as an employer, that's also important to be recognizing those things. And so creating a space within that work environment where people can be open and honest about what they're going through. If somebody gets a cancer diagnosis, the first thing that happens is everybody, gathers around them, and there's a meal train and there's all these things to help support that individual. Well, if you are struggling with addiction or you have a loved one that's struggling with addiction, you don't say a word, you don't talk about it, you don't do anything, and then there's nobody there to support you. And so, not quite answering your question, I apologize, I segued, but I just think creating that environment is so important, because I think it also helps people be more cognizant about what's going on in their life if they know it's something that they can talk about and get help and support for.
That actually speaks to the support system, or at least the people around you anyway, having their own support as well. Like it's not just as easy as supporting the person going through it, because they might be less desiring the actual support. There's nothing wrong with them, I'm fine. Sometimes it's the person closest to you that needs to tell you what the situation is. But then going through it, as you said, you have a medical condition, it's cancer, it's terminal, instantly everyone's gathering round and wanting your support, getting ready for some end of life treatment if you need it, that sort of thing. With an addiction, you don't get the same response from the people around you. And I wonder if it's because we don't necessarily know how to handle it. And then we don't know how the actual person would handle it if we didn't handle it in the best way. Weird roundabout way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
But is that why we actually recommend that support systems are in place for the people that support the people that potentially or do in fact have the addiction to things? Is it that complicated though, where like not just the person needs the help, but everybody around the person needs the help as well?
Yeah, I fully agree. I fully support that everybody around the person needs help as well. It it is, and we have a lot of stories where individuals were deep in their addiction. Unfortunately, it's the shame and stigma that I keep going back to. So people don't want to ask for that help. Then if they do ask for help, they get the advice as a loved one, like, you got to let them hit rock bottom. You've got to have tough love. And so then we end up approaching the person with addiction with a lot of nagging and negative energy, and that doesn't help them motivate to change. And so by engaging in our loved one program or some other program that helps teach some of those tools, there's ways to create healthy boundaries and to engage in a way that is healthy and helpful. And then end up having a better relationship with that person with addiction. And then oftentimes it motivates them to then either, go to treatment, seek a peer coach, whatever it is. And so I think it's super important. Our program is really focused on the health of the loved one, where like loved ones will call us and they're just desperate to get help for the person with addiction in their life. But really they need as much support as the person with addiction, because they're often also not sleeping because they're worried about where their person is. They're using maybe unhealthy coping skills like overeating, or maybe they're turning to drinking because they're trying to cope with the fact that this
Yeah.
person's gone. They don't know where they are. And so they need help and support too, to have healthy ways to cope through that struggle. So I think it's super important, and it helps make the whole process, I think, better for everyone, because they've got they're there in it together and doing it in a way that is healthy and helpful. One story that I like to share, one of our staff members at her previous employer, her son has opioid addiction and was struggling with getting him help. He was out. She was sleeping on the floor outside his bedroom to make sure that he didn't sneak out at night. I mean, going through all the motions of this. And so obviously not her best self at work because, not sleeping well, all those things. Um, she turned in her notice and was coming to work for Face It Together and ended up sharing with her boss that this was what she was going through and this is why she was coming to work here. Turns out they were both struggling with their sons and addiction, but all this time had never shared it. And again, it's that shame around it and not wanting to be open and honest. And really, they could have been a great support system for each other, but they didn't know they were both going through the same thing.
Right, right. It must be. I mean, can you imagine someone that's not at rock bottom yet, has people surrounding them that's maybe like trying to encourage them, but comes across as nagging, or they're trying to convince them to do the right thing. It's almost like they play a part in them hitting rock bottom, if being a bit cynical about it. But it's like the people that are around you are kind of pushing you down because they've been told that they need to, so that you can then lift them up, which is quite disencouraging. Dis Disencouraging. It's quite discouraging as someone that's trying to support someone, knowing that you play a part in them needing the help, and it's actually more help than if you hadn't said anything at all. In a way, like you don't push them down, so they don't need to come up from rock bottom if you hadn't stepped in to begin with.
Yeah, I mean it's all about being able. I mean, you still need to be able to create those healthy boundaries. So there is that need to make sure you're not sacrificing your own wellness just to be supportive of that person. But there's ways to do it that isn't that creates those boundaries, but yet helps to support them. And so it's not disengaging or like I have to cut you out of my life. That doesn't help. It doesn't. The opposite of addiction is connection, is the saying. And so just being able to have those tools to be able to provide that support.
If someone's in that position, what's worked? What version of connections helped? How have you been able to encourage people to turn that corner and make the change and get to a space where they start building momentum in the other way? It's hard. It's hard to do, and I imagine everyone will have a different approach. The way that I picture it, Wendy, is like the fun uncle giving you a little bit of advice. Someone that you get along with, someone that's quite funny, and they go, "Oh, that thing that you do? Like, I can tell that you're groggy for at least 2 or 3 days afterwards, and it's affecting your work." Or someone that can be blunt because they've got that door that's already pre-opened for them. Like the fun, you get along, and then they turn around and say, "By the way, you're destroying a big part of your life by doing this. Pull your socks up, otherwise it's going to get worse." I feel like that is the kind of relationship that at least I would like. It's someone that I'm fun, I get along with, an amazing relationship with. It's almost like, trying to think, someone where the relationship is so strong and so positive that they can tell a joke that's a bit direct. Like someone's makes fun out of you as a joke and it's funny. There's so few people that can do that. So few people that can make fun of you and intrinsically that it's a joke. Some people you get completely defensive. You start having a go at them. Like, how could you say such a thing? And they meant it as a joke, but you don't know because you're not close enough to them to assume that they're making fun. We need more connections like that, whereby they can be blunt and instantly that they've got your best interest at heart without having to over explain it or, you know, all of the other stuff that comes along with the level of connection that's not quite there yet. I've had both of those. That's why I can speak to it. I've had someone that can make fun of me all they want, and I know it's a joke and it's fine, and we get on with it. Actually builds the connection in a way. But then someone else will say the same thing, and I'm like, no, why are you doing that? Not even remotely funny. What are you even saying? How can we create that environment whereby someone can be blunt and honest and can have that kind of relationship with us and it be productive? Because there's so many versions of it that aren't productive.
Yeah, I think that is really the power of peer coaching in the fact that the people that are doing the coaching have had that experience either as a person with addiction or as a loved one, um, paired up appropriately. So persons with a person with addiction. But I think it's having that peer experience. And so being able to um, appropriately share their story enough so that the person that they're working with understands the journey that they've been on, and they build that rapport and that trust with each other. And so then it does give that peer coach the ability to ask the question that someone else might not be willing to ask them, or encourage them in a way that someone else might not be able to effectively do. And on the flip side, it can help that person be more honest about where they're at, because they can feel like they are in a safe environment and aren't going to get judged by saying, I made a mistake last night, or whatever that might be. And so I think it is just really creating, it is about that relationship, as you were talking about in your examples. It's having that safe, respectful, non-judgmental space where people can then motivate to have change. So I think it's helping educate loved ones on that as well. Helping them, and focusing on the right things. Like, our conversations aren't about the substance, because that's, again, as I mentioned earlier, is not really the issue. It's other things in their life, and that's how they're coping with whatever that thing is. And so oftentimes I think as loved ones, we would come at it from the wrong angle. We're asking the wrong questions in a very
Yeah.
negative and judgmental way. And so helping educate loved ones on really what addiction is and what to expect with addiction, and then helping them change the narrative in what they're saying to those individuals.
Can you give loved ones any tools, tips, prompts? You mentioned it's not about the substance or the what the addiction is, but what can they say to them? How can they open this door of trying to encourage them, at least in the opposite direction from what's not helping them? Like, how can you create the questions or the prompts for loved ones? Because I imagine peer coaches get some kind of education on how to speak to them, what kinds of things to stay away from, how to build rapport, those kinds of things. I found that sometimes family, close relatives, they have the hardest time opening them up because of a little thing I like to call consequences. Like, if you're close to them, if you're living with them, the consequences of sharing, of being honest, of being open are a lot bigger than someone that you only ever see on a Zoom call once every couple of months. Like, it's such a high touch environment being a loved one that I guess the risk inside the person's head probably outweighs the benefit in that kind of scenario. But then, as we've said, if you get it right, the change can be a lot bigger if a loved one is armed with this versus someone that they might see every month or whatever the case is. I feel like the help would be a lot stronger if the person that you have a high touch relationship with knew how to do this. So how can they?
Yeah. So again, I'm not one of the loved one coaches. So my loved one coaches would do this much better than me. But I think it's really like starting with just listening. So listening to where they're at, listening to what they're saying, trying to not come at them with judgment. Like, one example that I was in a conversation recently, is it about, well, where did you get the alcohol? Does it matter where they got the alcohol? Why did they get the alcohol? So it's thinking about things in a less judgmental way, and then listening to what they're going through, and then trying to figure out what steps you can take to support them in whatever aspect that is. Again, it's still setting those healthy boundaries, because you don't want to be giving up your whole self. So it's, like, okay, you can live with me, but that means you're going to do this, or, so setting those boundaries around what is going on. And so, again, it's listening, it's being non-judgmental, it's being supportive, but yet protecting yourself as well so that you're not putting yourself in a difficult position.
Notice as well that a lot of these little cues and ways that people can, I guess, discern whether it's judgmental or not is quite subconscious in a way. Like it's something that's in the way that you ask it, it's your body language, it's the little micro expressions that some people are more attuned to than others. Is there anything that because you can't just tell someone to be less judgmental because it's hard. They're not really sure how to be less judgmental in a way. But you've got this situation where someone will have a reaction. It sounds like the difference between those two questions that you said is one's a reaction and one's thinking about it, processing what they've said, and then asking the question. Like you've got to learn to be less reactive, I guess you could say. Is it as easy as that? Because so many people will probably sit there listening, thinking, how can I be less judgmental? Like they've been doing this for ages, and it's so hard to get them to. They feel like they might have to force the issue. Like judgmental might actually speed up this whole process if I do it this way, but there's clearly a better way. How can you help people have this anti-judgmental side of things? Because I imagine it can stop it in its tracks, can't it? Like if someone senses that they're being judged, that's as far as the conversation will go.
Yeah. What came to my mind, I'm the mother of a teenager. And so I have to use these tactics when communicating with her, and I don't always do them well. Like, um, I screw up too. And so as she's asking whatever, I want to just jump right, but without really listening. I want to just jump to the answer that I think needs to happen. And so it isn't easy at all. And loved ones will screw up. I mean, it's the way it is. It's a change in behavior and it takes time and it's hard work. But things go much better with my teenage daughter if I just take the time to listen to her and then respond instead of making up my decision on how to react before I fully listen to what she had to say. Maybe a small, silly example, but I think it's easy to come into the conversation with your own preconceived ideas. And so it's helping to, or taking the time to pause and then really think about how you're approaching the situation.
I found as well, and this is something to what you said, it's not going in with your own ideas about what you want to happen, about the way that you want it to go, because you can ask the question to get the answer that you want very often, especially when someone's not as adept at answering questions as you. You can ask the right question to get the answer that you already know that they should be saying. So you've played this whole thing out in your head, and you ask the question that the only possible answer will be the one that you wanted. And that's tough when you're dealing with people that don't necessarily think the same way that you do. And with addiction, they might not think they've got a problem. They may not think there's an issue at all. So if you say things like, "How did you get it? How often are you doing it? Like who are you taking it with?" Let's say there's so much to that that you don't even need to know. Like, you don't need to know all of that. You just need to know why are they doing it, because that will form part of the solution. Because you can help them achieve that thing with less negative consequences. And that's all that they would need. They could gradually replace one thing with the other and they're instantly better off. And I just think that very often it's so because in a fast-paced world, it's easy to react because you keep up with the pace of life sometimes. And I found that the slower I can go, the better it is because I've slowed down. And that's so difficult to do. It takes practice, it takes a lot of practice. And I think more people need to have this sense of pausing before they say anything or give yourself a chance. That if someone tells you something that's quite traumatic, pausing for a bit to process it is perfectly normal. If someone's got an opioid addiction, or maybe they're an alcoholic or whatever it is, and they're safe enough with you to come clean, in air quotes, and tell you that, that's hard to process and deal with. And the words that come out of your mouth after that need to be important. They need to be thought out. They need to be calculated, but in a positive way, not just calculated to get the outcome that you want. And you need, if anything, you need to tell them that you need to go away and process it and come back once I try and figure out what's best. And that's difficult to do because in the moment, whether you react, whether you freeze, whether you get defensive, that can have more negative consequences than positive because you're having the conversation from that position. And in a fast-paced world, some people don't have the time to come back to something later on in the day. They need to handle it now instead of handling it tomorrow or next week or whatever the case is. Is it as easy as that, just communicating that you might need to take some time with this before we restart this conversation, like put the pin back in and we'll open it again next week once I've had the chance to process it so I can give you the help that you need. How do you then go from figuring out what the issue is to then being in the space whereby you can actually have this productively? Because I think I've got a bit of a grasp on it after what I've just said, but I imagine there's some loopholes and things that I've missed. Like, how would you help someone?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is just that. And if you need to take a moment, I think that's okay. That's a boundary, right? Like I need to think about this a little bit instead of reacting. Because if you react in a inappropriate way, you can certainly take steps backwards. I think it is, you kind of mentioned this, but maybe adjusting your expectations, where I think a lot of it's not exactly how you said it, but part of what you said was kind of thinking about things a little bit differently. And so, I think loved ones come in and they want, they want the end game, they want the full, everything. Well, if like in the harm reduction example, if we go from drinking a case of beer at night to a 6-pack of beer at night, like, didn't we make progress? Like, celebrate that success. And so instead of coming that with, well, you're still drinking 6 beers a night, like the nagging approach to it, instead, like, wow, I'm so proud of you that you've cut from 24 to 6.
Yeah.
Or
Hmm.
um and so being okay, like maybe you'll still get to where the loved one wants to be, but be okay with where you're at today if you're making progress. And so then creating that like positive environment, positive reinforcement, all of those tactics.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but so it's adjusting the approach. And I mean, you could certainly see in that example, like it could go in a good direction or it could go in a bad direction. And it's all about adjusting your expectations.
Also, as well, like the idea of it going quickly as well. I think some people need to forget about that. I think people want it to go quickly. They want them to just do this thing and it'll go away. And I don't think that ever happens. Have you had an experience whereby, the desire is for it to go quickly? And I mean, quickly is a relative term, I imagine, but quickly and it goes quickly. Like someone wants it to go fast and it does. Have you ever had that?
I think it's always a journey. I mean, I often equate it for me, like food and weight loss, like it's a journey, right? It's, I can do really good for a while and then, oh, I'm going to struggle because I really want that, whatever.
Yeah,
Or you
yeah.
have a bad day and I want to go, eat a bag of chips or whatever. Same thing can go for addiction. And so it's, people can be really good. Actually, I mean, during COVID, we had a lot of re-engagement because I think people were well, and then COVID was a stressor, obviously, for all of us. And so it's recognizing that and knowing what your support system is. But I don't think it's ever quick. It's a process. Do people, and then you get to a point where it's not, people aren't obsessing about it every day, but it is a process to get there. Any kind of behavior change is not, any habit forming, whatever. It takes time. It's not a quick process.
I imagine the idea of harm reduction took a weird turn during the pandemic. I don't talk about the pandemic a whole lot on the show, but with something like habits and addictions and managing stresses and things of that nature, I imagine you had to go through quite a journey, shall we say, during the pandemic, especially with, people with different coping mechanisms, some healthier than others. What was that like? I don't talk about it a lot, but what was the pandemic like for yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly was a stressor for a lot of people. So as I mentioned, we had a lot of re-engagement. We do offer video coaching, so it was a really easy transition for us to be able to provide that support. So that was really good and positive. And we're still providing about 60, I think it's 60% of our coaching sessions by video, which prior was much, much lower than that. So, the world has changed. But I think, there it was a lot of people were recognizing they were home and, you know, doing drinking too much or smoking too much pot or whatever again it may look like, and then recognize that they needed some help. And so, but that was just one example where we just saw the stressors and we did see kind of a higher than normal amount of re-engagement.
I've also heard a bit of a rumor that you have quite the background yourself in terms of addictions and things of that nature. So, without prying too much to start with, what was your own journey like, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I think that my story is very similar to kind of a lot of what we talked about, like getting help or making a change before you hit the proverbial rock bottom. But as well as I kind of mentioned a moment ago, I was on weight loss journey, right? So I recognized I needed to make some changes in my life, and I also had gone to the doctor, gotten some lab values that they weren't awful, but they weren't awesome. So anyway, I'm gonna make some changes. I'm gonna lose some weight. I'm gonna get healthier. So part of that, then I kept telling myself, okay, so for the month of October, I'm not gonna drink. And I do really good for a week or two. I was in a stressful position. I worked for an individual that we didn't always see eye to eye, so things didn't always go well there. So I'd go a couple of weeks, I'd have a bad day at work, I'd come home, I'd drink 2 bottles of wine and start over again the next day. And this just was a continual pattern. And I have 4 kids. I wasn't present. So when I mentioned earlier, when you're replacing something else with something else that used to mean a lot to you, I was spending more
Yeah.
time drinking my bottle of wine than spending time with my kids. And so, I have 4 kids, loving husband. Again, that story of everything probably looked great from the outside looking in. Great job, great family. But I was miserable, like not happy, not healthy, not any of the things. And so this continued for about a year. And I recognized that I needed to make a change. And so I quit my job. And then ironically, right after I quit my job, I got recruited for Face It Together. So learned a lot about like things I wish I would have known when I had been
Yeah,
going
yeah.
the year prior. And so really and so now I practice, I would say, harm reduction. And so for me, it's being, as I mentioned, mindful. So just really thinking about, okay, why am I having this drink? Am I coming home from a bad day and I'm using the bad drink to erase my bad, using the drink to erase my bad day? Or am I just, having dinner and I'm having a glass of wine? Like it's looking at when and why I'm doing it and making sure that I'm doing it for the right reasons. But I definitely feel I was on a path if I hadn't made a change. So like a lot of people will minimize my story because they're like, well, you didn't have a problem. Oh, I definitely had a problem. I like couldn't wait to get home so I could open that bottle of wine. I mean, but it wasn't the proverbial rock bottom. And so people don't think of that as being a true issue. And so I think it's just trying to help change that narrative and getting people to recognize that there are ways to prevent getting to that point. And so
It
that
sounds
was,
like you'd have to like have a handle on what your habits are or what your go-to coping strategies are. Some people like to take notes, some people like to just go sort of mental awareness, a way of like analyzing themselves a little bit. It can seem a little robotic to do it, but I imagine, especially when you're going from, I don't know, 2 bottles of wine to a bottle and a glass, you're gradually trying to reduce it down. How do you suggest people start being more aware of what they're like or what the tendencies are, or how do they spend? Because it sounds like you've had to go on your own little like awareness journey yourself, Wendy. So I imagine I wouldn't say you were an expert at it, as in you can tell people what to do, but your experience will definitely help others. So how would you actually suggest people do this? Become more self-aware, more analytical, I guess, about their behaviors, try to figure themselves out. How can people do it?
yeah. So for me, I didn't, I guess part of my story that I didn't share right at the end of that year. So my youngest child was, I don't know, 5 or 6 at the time. And he had was going to do a play, and he had given my husband and I tickets for this play and was up in his room, and I was making dinner, and normally I would have been like, yeah, whatever, buddy, I'll later, and then later would never happen. And but I actually took the time to do it that night, and he talked about it for weeks afterwards, and like this light bulb went off in my head that I've been missing out on all of these moments like this that are just normal everyday moments, but I was missing them. um so I don't know if there's like a silver bullet. I think it's just paying attention to the universe and what the universe is trying to tell you, because that for me, that was my sign. Like um the fact that something so simple as going and watching this 5-minute play that my son put on um, woke me up to know that I needed to make a change. And that's going to be different for everyone. But I don't know. It's, I suppose, just taking stock of what like having what are your values and what is what fills your cup, and make sure that the things that are filling your cup are really part of your life.
One of the things that made me think about was I think it was Evan Almighty, the comedy film, where is it, Morgan Freeman plays God in the films, and he says, "Does God make you feel a certain way, or does he create situations to teach you that thing? So if you want to be more patient, does he make you more patient, or does he put you in situations that would normally frustrate you to exercise patience, to be more patient? So does he just give you the thing, or does he let you create it, with the way that you experience life? And I've started to see things a bit more that way. I don't know if you have, and it's hard because you've got to realize that what you're responding to in an impatient way, there is a better way to go about it. There is a more effective way. There is a more helpful way, even if the only benefit that you get is your own stability in a way, is the only way I could put it. You're more stable if you're more patient, more resilient, less negative, less reactive. It's a bit stoic in a way. I don't like using that word, but having the ability to react in a better way than you were doing is kind of all that there is. You want to be patient. Okay, you got to be in situations that challenge your level of patience to trigger it, to cause you to overflow in your frustration and become impatient. If nothing tests you, well, you're always patient, aren't you? Because you've never been tested. You're always healthy, aren't you? Because you've never been tested. It's like if you've never been put in those situations, you won't know how patient you are until you're stuck in a traffic jam that's like 10 miles long and you're not going anywhere. Then we'll see how patient you really are, if you understand what I mean. So I found that that's kind of what it is in a way. It's been my experience, it's been a lot of other people's experience. It sounds like similar to what you were saying there with your child's play as well, was that in order to acknowledge that maybe you weren't being as present with your child, he had to create this play to let you see that that's what was going on.
Mhm.
Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it certainly woke me up and made me recognize that a change needed to happen. And um, I think again it'd be different for everyone, but it's hoping that people can have that light bulb go off sooner, or I should say it probably goes off, but that they actually listen to it and actually act on it. Because I think people see the signs long before they hit
Yeah.
rock bottom.
Mm.
But it's actually doing something about it earlier in the process and recognizing that this is the point that a change needs to be made.
Yeah, that makes sense actually, because it's one thing to have the information, another thing to act on it and do something productive with it. What did you do when you had that? What did you have to sit down and think, right, this needs to change, and you just uprooted everything and replanted it in the right places? I imagine it wasn't as easy as that, but if you have the light bulb and you're sat there like, oh, this is what's been happening. I need to change this. I don't like this. What happens next?
Well, I think I got lucky. I mean, I quit my job. That was the root of a lot of my stress, which is pretty drastic and dramatic. So I'm not saying that's the answer either for everyone. Um, but then I think just the fact that I ended up where I ended up at Face It Together, and I mean, again, could I have really benefited from having a peer coach? I absolutely, and it may have been able to then not quit my job had I been engaged in that way. But I think just being part of the organization, learning more about addiction, more about the effects of alcohol and other drugs. Um, I think it just helped me just understand things better. And then um, again, it's that for me, it was the mindfulness concept. There's lots of different concepts for people on what is helpful for them, but that's the one that works for me, is for me to just really pause for a minute and think, okay, why am I doing this? Nope. And the first time I had a bad day and I didn't come home and drink, like it was such a win. Like I felt amazing. And I was like, I didn't drink last night. Like, which I mean, probably it's a little silly, but like it was a big step for me. And I guess I had another situation where I don't need to get into all of it, but I was meeting someone, I was really nervous. And normally I would have had a drink at dinner and I didn't. And that too was just an amazing feeling because I was fully present, fully aware, remembered the whole conversation. Like it was just in like remembering that feeling. And so then that's something too to draw off of in future situations that like, yeah, I don't need to have a drink to cope with this anxiety that I'm
Yeah.
having in the situation.
It sounds like once you've figured out how you tick and why you're doing what it is that you're doing, and then I guess you've got to also understand that everything can potentially have a negative consequence, but some have less than others. There are things that you can do that have less negative consequences than others. And I kind of feel like that could make a big difference for people. You know, that there are other ways to respond, there are other ways to react, even to the situations that you're in. But Wendy, it's been great to have you on. I really enjoyed hearing your story and some help for people that are going through this and the people that are trying to support them through it as well. So, how can people find out more about you? You can share about the nonprofit, the work that you're doing. How can people get involved? And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're Face It Together. So you can go on the web to wefaceit together.org.
Thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Those that are listening, feel free to subscribe, share the show, tell others, and also leave a review wherever you are listening into your podcasts. Wendy, thanks so much for joining me, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
If you want to join a group of like-minded people that are all out to achieve their goals, their dreams, their aspirations, and they get the help and support from me and the other members, then my inner circle is for you. There's a link in the description for this episode to get 2 months free of the inner circle. So you set your membership up, you get 2 months free access. Hopefully I'll see you there, and I look forward to helping you on your journey of achieving the life that you want.